You're listening to The Sacred Sofa, a podcast that explores all things theology and therapy. My name is Grace Brown. I'm a registered psychotherapist, certified Canadian counselor, and owner of Journey with Grace Counseling Services.
And I'm Brad Watson, pastor of Nexus Church and author of the book, A Path Called Compelling. Welcome to The Sacred Sofa.
Welcome to The Sacred Sofa, everyone. We hope you are enjoying your summer. For the summer months here at The Sacred Sofa, we are airing pilot episodes we pre-recorded before officially launching this podcast.
This week, we are closing up our mini-series on power by looking at forgiveness and reconciliation and why the two, despite being used interchangeably, are two very different things. We hope you enjoy.
In our first episode, we defined and explored and expanded on the concept of the misuse of power and control and how that can go rogue and show up in abusive and oppressive systems, unfortunately, including in church settings. So we talked quite a bit about that. In our second episode, we started to explore the concepts around accountability, true accountability. How do you know when someone's willing to take personal responsibility for their actions? And now we're going to be talking in this episode about expanding more on the concept of forgiveness and what is reconciliation.
Absolutely. And I think those two things get so linked together and almost assume that they're the same thing. So we thought we'd spend a whole episode maybe looking at the differences and when we're ready for reconciliation, that sort of thing. So yes. Do you want me to jump in on forgiveness here a bit?
Yes, I believe making sure we're on the same page in terms of definition and understanding of certain words and concepts is super important. And then we can move forward. So would you be willing to define forgiveness?
Yes. So I have a friend named Herb. I love his definition the best. He says this: forgiveness is not accepting a hurt as okay, nor is it giving up the desire for truth and reconciliation. Forgiveness is giving up the desire for retaliation or revenge. So I've heard it sort of defined by other folk as forgiveness is letting go of the other person's neck, that instinct we have that when we've been hurt, we want to lash back. So it doesn't accept the hurt as okay. It doesn't mean sort of forgive and forget, that whole sort of, hey, I'm just going to forget that ever happened. No, it doesn't mean any of that. It's simply, I no longer now wish ill things on this other person. I don't want to see them hurt. I don't want to retaliate, get revenge. It's simply letting go of, I think, that desire. I think that for me, I mean, there's always nuances with forgiveness. That's at least a good place to start, I think, for forgiveness. Now, do you have a working definition in your field of work?
I really like that. It's a little more challenging in my field of work because it's often associated with more spiritual concepts. But right. I like the definition you've taken from her because that is more practical. You know, you can sort of sit with that image in your mind, letting go of someone's neck. That's a desire to also hurt and revenge. And that is quite tangible for me. The other tangible way I explain it, especially to clients that I'm working with, is forgiveness is an act of the will. It's a choice you're making to release that other person and choosing not to make them pay for how they hurt you. And right. So forgiveness is about releasing yourself. It's really not about the other person. And in terms of spirituality and faith, it's a restoration of not only yourself between you and God, but then opens up potential for you to have healthy relationships with community. And so you used a bit of that imagery in the service a few weeks ago as well.
Yeah. And, you know, I like to think about it right now in Canada, we're dealing with a ton of wildfires, right? I love this idea that more than 50% of wildfires are caused by lightning, right? So there's an initial strike, and I like to see it, you know, as that's the wound, the lightning strike. Holding on to that, though, is an initial strike, an initial hurt or wound growing into like a wildfire, an inferno. And if we don't find a way to process or deal with the pain of being hurt or wounded by someone. If we don't find a way to deal with that, it can get out of control in us. It can own, I think you and I have even talked about this, the idea of, a metaphor of seeing our head as real estate. And sometimes people can take up, they can be freeloaders in our head. We're consumed about thinking about this person, what they've done, what we wish we could say, right? Like it just can be consuming to us. And so I think forgiveness is finding that way to make sure that that wound doesn't spiral out of control. I love what you just said, not making them pay. There's just so many ways that we can hold on to a hurt and then it becomes consuming. And so forgiveness really is about us, the individual, being set free from that. But it's certainly no easy work.
I love the imagery of journey, because this is not a one and done. We talk about stages of grief, which isn't a great word in the English language, because we think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, stages, I'm done, but it's not a start at point A and get to point B in a lateral motion. It's a lot of stop start, and you find yourself back where you seemingly feel like you're at the beginning. And as time goes, that back and forth motion is still moving you forward along the path of healing, along the path of forgiveness. Having people understand that this is a journey, it's a day by day commitment to not making the person pay, not continuing to give them real estate in our head. That takes time. And I think a lot of people have been hurt with this concept of forgiveness, because it's like, I need to forgive this person. They dispense with the understanding of the emotional and spiritual and mental pain someone has experienced, especially on the degree of harm or betrayal. And that can be incredibly damaging, further damaging to a person, to have this expectation that forgiveness now, instantaneous.
How often do we find in relationships or marriage, sometimes something will come back up? That incident that happened, or that word they said to us that hurt years ago, right? Sometimes we can, yes, I've forgiven, but it's that continual process of, okay, this isn't one and done. I'm still going to have to deal with feelings as they come to me, as I'm reminded of a hurt or harm, or, for others, it's like, I saw that person and I'm feeling something just by seeing them. And in that, I realize, okay, the work still continues. There's still the work. Yeah. And I love that your counseling is journey with grace, right? Because it's a process. And so if we can allow people, give them the freedom to see forgiveness as an ongoing work, and that it's about letting go of those negative feelings, ill will we feel towards the other, wanting them hurt or harm on the other person. Hopefully that is something healthy for people to work with. Okay, this doesn't mean I have to see them again necessarily. It doesn't mean that I have to pretend something never happened, because there's just so many of those negative ideas about forgiveness swimming around out there.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that those listening will get a sense of understanding and validation. When you feel those revoked emotions, those heavy emotions, that doesn't mean the healing is not continuing. Some people will get really upset and say, well, maybe I haven't forgiven them, or maybe I'm going to stay stuck feeling this forever. And I'm encouraging you to don't give up, be patient with your process, because what's minor offense to you could be a major offense to me. And so it's not an individual formula. Each person's journey is going to be different. You talked last Sunday about from couch to 5K. I'm still at the beginning of that app. That is hard.
It is hard. Yes.
And so just being compassionate and understanding of each person's journey as they move forward in terms of healing is so important. So important.
And even I wanted to touch on something you mentioned there too, because this just happened this morning. My daughter was saying, hey, I'm feeling some negative things towards someone and some negative emotions. And she said, is it okay? And then she said, is Jesus okay if I feel this? I think that's important to flag too. Whatever we feel, that's okay. We can't control how we feel. Those sort of come to us. It's always how we respond. And so forgiveness, I would say, is not getting entirely rid of negative feelings about a person. It's the refusal to respond with hurt and harm of our own, or where we allow those feelings to go, because we're going to get stuck in our journey if we're like, oh, I have to be walking around always thinking kumbaya about everyone. And I think anytime somebody hurts us, of course, there's going to be feelings involved there. So parsing all that out is just important.
Just real quickly, Brad, emotions are neutral. Feelings are neutral. And you were onto something, and I just want to add a little bit of nuance so we're careful here. Emotions are neutral. What we do with it is whether it's helpful or harmful. And so even practicing teaching our children and others language about emotions, they're God-given. They're a part of what makes us human. I have a nice campfire. My husband built us a little fire pit in the backyard. I love it. I love fire. You know me. I love to be toasty. I love the s'mores that go along with this fire pit. But that fire out of containment will absolutely destroy. Absolutely destroy, just as the wildfires you were talking about. So our emotions, they're there. They're given to us. We have to learn to harness the power of them so they don't destroy ourselves and others in our path. And so emotions are neutral. What we do with them are helpful or harmful.
Right. So even I had mentioned there, tell me, expand on this a little bit for me, Grace. So I'd said my daughter was feeling negative emotions. Would you even use phrase like that? Should be just emotions that were maybe not welcome for her. She didn't like the feeling of them, not necessarily that the emotions themselves are negative, but that they were making her feel down, making her that sort of thing. See, I think even that's helpful, right? The way we talk to our kids. Because if I reinforce to her that's a negative emotion, then it's easy to sort of inherit this, oh, I shouldn't feel that. So I shouldn't feel jealousy, or I shouldn't feel, and it's like, no, that's very
those are natural emotions. Absolutely. And, it's we who tend to give context and connotation to certain things. And we're socialized. If you think of, sorry, Disney, Hallmark, this Disney score in the background, everything's going to be okay. You talk about kumbaya. We're socialized to want to move away from the things that make us uncomfortable. And our emotions, those what I call heavier emotions, absolutely uncomfortable with it, but it's necessary to acknowledge them and manage them in a way that's helpful. Sadness is a part of life. Do we like to feel it? No, but it's a part of life. We have to be able to acknowledge it and move our way through it. Emily Nagoski is a researcher and educator. She talks about going through that emotional tunnel, not getting stuck in the tunnel, moving out to the other side. Sadness, enter the tunnel, work through the process, come out the other side.
That's really helpful, even for me, just listening to you here and talking to you here as a parent, right? I think we've helped, I hope we have, anyone listening, parsing out what forgiveness is and all the things maybe involved in that. Now, of course, there's another aspect to the whole process here, and that's reconciliation. Could you maybe help us? That is not forgiveness. Forgiveness and reconciliation are different. But what is reconciliation?
Reconciliation is to be reconciled or to be united and connected again. So that implies there's been a breach of some sort, a tearing, and then both parties hopefully are working towards bridging the gap that was created by some form of harm or betrayal. And like we said before, forgiveness is a different act than the process of reconciliation. And hear me say a journey again. There's no such thing as instantaneous reconciliation when there has been a breach. And so a rejoining again with intention, with commitment. That's how I see it. Do you have a definition that you work with also?
I think you've hit the nail right on the head. I think for church folk, where it gets confusing, and I think this is important, is that we can get Bible verses stuck in our head, right? And Paul talks about how we are ministers of reconciliation, Jesus path people. And I think our automatic assumption is that if we have a broken relationship, that the end goal is always a restored relationship. Now, let me frame this and just say that Paul was always talking to communities, and in his world, he was dealing with broader, broken relationships than individuals. We're talking about ethnic, race, sex, socioeconomic barriers. So when he talks about ministers of reconciliation, I don't think he's talking about abused person reconciling with abuser. I think he's talking about people groups in society that were largely at odds and stayed away. And I just think that's important for us to keep in mind, because it can be difficult to get the forgiveness part right if in the back of our heads we're always thinking, okay, so the end goal of this is that I will be united with this person again. And I think that that can be unhealthy when there's abuse, those sorts of things in a relationship. I think there are times to say, no, I can forgive, but I will never be fully reconciled to this person. That hurt is too deep, at least this side of eternity, you know? So I just want to separate those, because I do think reconciliation is a great goal, especially if the hurt is with somebody close to me, my family. But there are situations, I would just say right off, that probably for health reasons, it's not good to be thinking about moving to reconciliation.
Yes, I would agree. And I appreciate how you mentioned that for many people in the back of their mind, or even said overtly, is this expectation that they're going to be reconciled in a new relationship with a person who's created harm. And that often hangs people up. It's like, you know what? Nope, can't do it. And then that affects them spiritually, because it's like, I know God calls me to forgiveness, to healthy relationship and reconciliation, but I'm stuck. And so you're giving people freedom to say, I'm making a choice to forgive. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's in terms of myself and God. But there has to be a way for me to trust and be hopeful again for reconciliation. And there absolutely are indicators that would say, is this safe to proceed?
Will you walk us through those, Grace? Because I think that's important for us to understand. Where is there opportunity for reconciliation? When is there not? What are the signs, indicators of that?
I think the first thing that people have to understand is you have a choice. There is no mandate in terms of reconciliation. And so when there's been harm, when there's been betrayal, you have a choice to heal and rebuild with the person, or healing is always within your choice, or rebuild in new relationship, new healthy relationship. I'm taking from some of the work of researcher and teacher called Dr. Debbie. She's the founder and CEO of the PBT Institute, which stands for Post-Betrayal Transformation Institute. And she talks about this. I love how people speak in metaphors with imageries. I see pictures. The window of willingness. And she says the window that's the widest open has the most potential to rebuild. You can either choose to heal and rebuild with that person with the proper indication, or continue your healing and then rebuild in new relationships. Some people get stuck with frustration because they don't feel like the reconciliation process is moving forward, even despite their greatest attempts. And so I'm going to quickly summarize it for you.
Yeah, please do. That would be great.
So if there are 4 levels that she talks about, level 1 is where it's the widest open, the most potential for reconciliation. You'll know it's wide open in a level 1 when there's remorse, apology, regret, and restitution. And we talked a little bit about that in episode 2. True accountability looks a certain way. There's no minimizing, there's no denying or blaming. So she says you can have an indicator of this person is at level 1 when they say words like, I'm so terribly sorry for how I hurt you, whether it be yelling, physical harm. They're going to be specific about how they created harm. And then there's the remorse piece, or an acknowledgement of the impact of their actions. I can't imagine how painful that is. And this is a restitution part. What in the world can I do to make it up to you? When a person's at 11-1, you're off to a great start. You're taking responsibility. The possibilities are endless at that point.
That's good to know. Okay. So that's wide open.
wide open.
Now we're getting into murkier territory. Yeah.
Yes. Level 2, the window starts to close a bit and there's a bit less potential. You know that by people saying things like, I did it because. And this is where that minimizing starts to come in. You can potentially still move forward in reconciliation at level 2, but there's a bit less potential than in level 1, where the window is wide open.
Okay.
Level 3 and 4, even less potential. You know it's a level 3 when the window closes even further and you hear the you word. Well, I did it because you, ... I said it because you, ... Dr. Debbie calls this the two-sided slap.
Huh.
One slap, you get betrayed. The second slap, you get blamed.
Oh, that's good.
This is where we talk about words that, is trending right now. Things like gaslighting, making the person believe that they're the one with the problem and they're too sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So not a lot of potential there. This person is not taking any responsibility. And in fact, they're moving into denial and blaming. And then level 4, the window is sealed shut. This person is not taking responsibility. You'll hear it with things like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. You're too sensitive. Maybe you need to get some help. There is nowhere to move here. If you try to move forward, you're going to have incredible frustration and more victimization because this person has taking no responsibility for how they've created harm. And so I like that imagery of that window and closing by those specific behaviors.
Yeah, that was incredibly helpful. Thank you, Grace. I think it would be great for people if they're in this situation where they're working through forgiveness, they're thinking about reconciliation. I think that's a really helpful piece. And you've given us there certain warning indicators to look for. And of course, there's always the temptation anytime to want to explain yourself why you did certain actions. But as you got in those 2 lower levels where it becomes, I did this not because I was tired, but because you did something, a blaming there. And that two-sided slap, that's a really powerful image, right? Like you get hurt, then you get blamed for being hurt. I think that's a great image for us to think through and to ask ourselves, okay, so where's the window with this person? Is it wide open or shut, somewhere in between? That's helpful. And I hope it helps our listeners as well.
I like this imagery as well, because we talked about forgiveness is one person's real responsibility, true responsibility. In terms of reconciliation, both parties have a role to play here. Eyes wide open, looking for indicators that it's safe to proceed. And then the other person who created harm, they also have to be doing something, taking responsibility, which then opens up the possibility for a bridge to be rebuilt potentially. And so there are more than one party involved in the reconciliation process. Yeah. And I love not only this imagery, but I think it's such an important concept for us to understand and talk about and help folks in terms of healing, because so many times people who have been victimized start to blame themselves, or they're doing too much work. They're trying to build a bridge and there's not enough materials.
Yeah, to be working with, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I'm hoping this imagery helps folks say, okay, what are my indicators that I can continue to move forward in a healthy way, not out of misplaced sense of guilt or being shamed by the community who feels like, oh, this person needs to be, re-entered into community.
And even as you're talking about that, I'm just thinking about the times that I have reconciled with people, and it's just hitting me now as you described that. All of those healthy window wide open elements were there. People, whether it was myself or the other person, just willing to own it and acknowledge, I really hope I can maybe earn your trust back, but I know I've hurt you, and just very specific. And rarely do things go well when there's a bit of a double blame game going on, right? So that's just helpful for me to think back on my own processes and realize all the stuff you just said was in place for reconciliation to happen.
I think we probably all have experienced this desire I listened to some teachings by an educator. She calls herself the little shaman. And she talks about often we're looking at the potential of what could be rather than living in the reality of what is. You know, my husband and I joke often, and he would love to win the 649 lottery, win the big one.
Right.
So would I, frankly.
Yes.
But I can't live like I won the 649. The money's not in my account. It's not, right? It doesn't exist. And so we have to be able to, even though it's painful, face the reality of the situation. If we're seeing level 1 wide open, the potential is endless. But as soon as you start seeing level 3 and 4, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
I love working with images and metaphors. I love that idea, you know, hey, it would be great to live as though I won the lottery, but that's just not the reality right now, right? Living in what are we actually seeing from that other person? This is just really helpful. Is there anything we left maybe that we haven't covered between forgiveness and reconciliation?
I don't think so. Important key things are to remember is reconciliation requires more than one party. It's not just up to you, the person who's been harmed. Your healing is your responsibility, and that can look so many different ways. Dr. Debbie also talks about a 4 legs on a table: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And often we want to focus on physical healing, even mental, and are dismissing the emotional and spiritual components of healing. All of it takes time. Nothing of what we've talked about is instantaneous. Do you like instant coffee?
Yeah, no.
You know, it takes time to percolate, to marinate. You're going to be moving forward and back through this process and journey. And understanding that about your process invites self-compassion, invites understanding to your process. And that goes a long way as well.
That's excellent. And I hope people continue to work through owning the forgiveness journey on our end, that it's not a one and done thing, and looking for those signs of whether or not reconciliation is even on the table. But again, as we stressed a little bit earlier, making sure that we don't come into the whole forgiveness process thinking that reconciliation is a must or necessary part of the journey. Forgiveness, it could be just that, especially if that window's closed. Well, thank you, Grace, for our time together. I appreciate it. I hope this has been helpful. And I always benefit listening to you, hearing from you, little things that just, they really stick with me and help. So thanks for that.
Appreciate it, Brad. I enjoy talking with you and unpacking a lot of these concepts. And I hope folks really can just lock into even some of these imageries, taking away that window of willingness. That's a nice key piece to use as an indicator of moving forward in healthy reconciliation and healthy relationship.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, folks, we'll sign off for another one here.
Goodbye, everybody.